Aside from are you single, do you know what the #1 question I get asked these days is?
What do you prefer, the RX 480 or the GTX 1060?
Well, it's probably high time that I actually answer the fucking question so you people can stop asking and I can just link you to this video in the future. For those of you unaware, let me go over the basics so we can kind of catch you up to speed. The RX 480HG and the GTX 1066G are meant to be competitors, and depending on where you happen to live in the world, they are roughly the same price, usually within about 3 or 4% of one another. Interestingly enough, while the averages would suggest that this is an easy choice favoring the GTX 1060, there's a lot more going on underneath the hood that makes this issue more complicated. It's actually very similar to the way the US election panned out, where Hillary Clinton won by about 2% in the popular vote, but because of Donald Trump's strategic campaigning and appealing to the right segment of voters, he was able to take Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania away from the blues to give himself the victory, ever so barely. And that's sort of what the RX 480 is trying to do. The RX 480 cannot compete with the GTX 1060 in terms of raw performance in the bulk of the games that are currently present on the market, but they figure that by targeting DirectX 12 and Vulkan and taking advantage of new APIs and including technology that will support them in the future, their card will be more appealing to someone who is looking to retain that card for service long term. As it turns out, the plan was a resounding success because the early results from games like Doom and Hitman seem to favor the RX 480 considerably. But is that reason enough to choose the weaker card over the GTX 1060? The short answer is no, unfortunately. Unless you are playing Doom and Hitman and Ashes of the Singularity and Gears of War Ultimate Edition exclusively, the odds of you getting better bang for buck out of your RX 480 over the GTX 1060 are slim. Let's not forget that the overwhelming majority of games that are coming out today even are built on the older APIs. Engines need time to catch up, developers need time to get the memo, and it's going to be another 1.5 to 2 years before the RX 480 really gets to stretch its legs in this wonderful DX12 and Vulkan environment. So the bottom line is, will the RX 480 still be relevant by the time all of this comes to fruition? Well, let me put it to you this way. It's kind of like a 7-year-old going to a fucking pharmacy and buying a condom. I mean, technically he could get laid, but it's probably not going to happen until he's a teenager, so you should probably just buy one then, because the one in your pocket's going to expire before you get to use it. And that is where the RX 480, at least in that regard, currently stands. If it's going to be 2 years before it becomes relevant, just buy a card in 2 years that's more suited for these new APIs and just fucking save your money for today, or buy a 1060. But that's not necessarily all there is to the story, and this would be a very boring video if it were. Now, while API support alone might not make the RX 480 a favorable candidate, there are plenty of things that AMD is doing, and doing successfully, to try and make their card more viable in the short-term future. #1, driver support is always notoriously bad out of the gate with AMD, and they get progressively better over time. So as where you might see a launch day differential of about 8 to 10% versus its closest competitor, by the time that card has reached the end of its lifespan, in a lot of cases, it's actually surpassed that card. The GTX 780 Ti crushed the R9 290X on release by a good 10 to 12%, but ended up coming to parity with it by the time the GTX 970 was released. And of course, the most recent example that I can think of would be the R9 Fury X, which on release was an absolutely dismal failure by comparison to the 980 Ti, but nowadays that gap has once again narrowed. So things might not always be what they seem with AMD. Now don't get me wrong, this is a terrible business idea on AMD's part. You do not sacrifice sales today for gains tomorrow, because by the time tomorrow comes, your card is no longer relevant. This is precisely why AMD's market share is so small. Nvidia has a habit of being really good right out of the gate. They make the benchmarks look great, the reviews look great, they're just great on release because they sort of cut all the bullshit out and build cards for today, as where AMD is always seemingly engineering for the future. They have larger frame buffers, wider buses, everything just looks better in the long run for the AMD cards, but everybody kind of realizes that it becomes time to upgrade long before that benefit really makes itself known. But there's even more to the story than that, because of a little thing called FreeSync. Now, as much as I do like FastSync, which is a software solution from Nvidia meant to sort of supplement and or replace G-Sync depending on your budget, nothing beats the real thing, and a nice hardware solution is always a better way to go and much more elegant in terms of its performance and appearance. And as much as fast sync doesn't add a hell of a lot of latency, it still adds a wee little bit. And if you're a competitive gamer, that sort of thing matters. So of course, if you really care about graphical fidelity, but you still want to be lightning fast, FreeSync is probably the option best suited for you. So when you factor that into the equation, now all of a sudden the battle becomes a lot more even. But ultimately, games released today and games released for the next 2 years are going to be based on old APIs and old engines because things take time to change. And based on that alone, you should not be buying a card for how it will perform in the future, especially a mid-range card. See, a high-end card will transition down into the mid-range when it's 3 or 4 years old, and it will compete with cards that are in the meat of the price curve in the future. But that's not the case with the RX 480. The RX 480 should be outclassed and into the budget sort of tier by the time the next series of GPUs is released. So I'm not necessarily heave gung-ho recommending the 1060, but it's the winner. It's the clear winner. NVIDIA built the card for now, and once again they succeeded, even if it's by the ever so slightest of margins. I think we're going to call that one a video, and I know I didn't explicitly say it in my last video, which was just a giveaway notice, but thank you genuinely for getting me to 3,000 subscribers, and if you disagree with what I had to say in this or any of my videos, you can fuck off. Anyhow, kidding aside, follow me on Twitter at Ofa, and oh, we have some big news coming up actually, big news regarding streaming and some new technology that no one has ever seen before, believe it or not. So if this is something that interests you, stay tuned, because it's gonna be great, yeah!